Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to discuss and show you some of my use of the Reiff Knives F6 Leicu Survival Knife. It's the one pictured on the top there in the image in the video, just above the orange knife. Very, very cool knife. Had a great experience with it. Here's some of the specs I know people usually ask, so I just decided to post it right there so you can catch them all. Go ahead and pause the screen if you need to. Don't miss those handle specs, those are really impressive. I'm going to start off by talking about the sheath. I really like JRE sheaths in general. Very high quality. This one is no exception at all. The knife itself, you know, it's almost perfect. Actually, it fits like it was custom designed for that. Maybe it was, maybe I don't know. But it fits really, really well. I like to wear dangler attachments, especially in anything probably below 50 degrees. If I'm going to wear an anorak or a winter jacket, having a dangler is a really good attachment option. As you can see here, I can either just throw my coat a little bit around the handle, or I can cover it up completely if it's snowing or raining out. And in the summertime, the nice thing with this JRE sheath is I can just wear it on the first loop up on my hip and keep it just a little bit higher so it's not dangling around quite as much. But in the wintertime, guys, this is how you see me carry knives. I rarely carry a knife on the hip very high unless it's a very small blade, which I actually do with the F3. I'll be talking about that in a separate video, but all you need to know is Reiff Knives properly equipped their knife with a high quality complementary leather sheath, and it works well. Retention is great. Now, let's talk about that blade. Something I think is interesting is, maybe you find this interesting too, is I have friends who are, believe it or not, they're not knife guys. You know, we do guns together, and my channel is guns and blades really heavily, backpacks, that kind of thing. Outdoors gear in general, but I like to do knives, and I like to do a knife video every once in a while to remind people that I still am a gun and a knife channel. And I've got some friends who, they're really not knife guys, but I've put one of these three Reiff knives into their hands, and they immediately can pick out there's something unique, there's something good about this knife. And maybe they don't have the skills yet or the use yet to know how to pick it out or explain it, but when they get it in hand and they start using one of these blades, they're like, whoa, this is really high quality. You know what I think it is? I think it's partially the balance, and it's the materials, and it's the ergonomics of the blade. I think that communicates to people's brain like, hey, this is a really high quality knife. There's something good about it. And when I get a really good blade, I actually go to where you're seeing right now in this clip, in this footage. This isn't my own property, but it's a place where I get left alone. Pretty much nobody wants to try to hike over to this spot for whatever reason, like precisely where I'm at on this rock. So I grab a good blade from time to time, especially in the winter when it's beautiful like this, and I go sit out on the rock and I just go whittle or work with some wood. And this is a Leicu inspired survival knife. So I grabbed a really hard piece of pine. You know, it's kind of one of those sticks that's filled with resin, very, very hard, and I started to whittle and carve with it and start doing notches and kind of a tri-stick, the usual thing that you do when you first get a blade. And I actually have had this one for a little while. I probably had a little too long. I think I'm the last guy to put out the review on this blade, but at least you know I've really truly been using it quite a bit. When I'm going to do a feather stick, I like to take off all the other branches and things that I'm going to run into, and sometimes I'll just square off the ends just out of practice and using the knife. Using chest lever there, very comfortable, especially for a guy of my size with big hands. Very comfortable handle, rounded off really nicely, no hot spots. And you know, that phrase gets used too much when people say, oh, there's no hot spots on this knife. I've seen just terrible blades with like rocky tread handles, and people are saying, no hot spots. That's ridiculous. Sorry for the attitude, but I think it's ridiculous. Now this knife, I can actually say it's big enough for my hands, and it didn't give me hot spots. Makes me very happy. Now, that being said, when I do feather sticks with blades like this, like bigger blades that have a V grind, this one has a like barely any saber grind to it, or it's a hollow grind rather. It has barely any hollow grind in that saber grind. It's mostly a saber grind, but because of the way it's sharpened, you know, it's just slightly hollow, and I really like that. But it's got a V grind, which is kind of convexed, okay? And so it actually makes really nice curls. And I usually like to use that knee draw method where I kind of brace it against my knee in the previous clip you saw there. And then sometimes just pushing it straight forward like this. When it has a really nice convex edge, a lot of times you can make pretty impressive curls like this, and you have so much blade to work with. You know, it's about, I think, maybe a 5 3/4 actual cutting surface on this 3V blade, and so you have lots of real estate to work with and move forward as you're going through a stick. You don't run out of blade very easily is what I'm saying. And I did make some feather sticks and then tried out my fire starter there, ferrocerium rod. Now the spine is not super sharp, and I don't really care about that because I can grab a rock and scratch it up if I want it to be more rough, or hit a ferro rod, you know, even better. But people, especially YouTubers, make too big of a stink about how sharp a knife spine is. As long as it can strike the rod, or I can grab a rock and rough it up a little bit, it's fine. I don't need it to be super sharp on the spine. In fact, sometimes, to be honest with you, it's a little annoying when you start carving and you're using your thumbs to reinforce cuts, kind of like what you see right here. I've got a thumb behind there on the spine a little bit. When I start making notches and I'm carving with this big blade, you know, it's 3/16 inch thick, which kind of helps me with support and comfort. But if it's really sharp on those edges, it's not comfortable to carve with it. And most of the time, I just need it to be sharp enough, or you know, kind of brought to a point enough where it can scrape that ferro rod. And usually what I do, guys, is I grab a rock or a file or something like that and just hit the spine in one spot, and that's the spot I hit the ferro rod with. Now what you just saw right there, that shearing power on that chest lever cut, that's one of the reasons I love this knife. I don't really own any knives that are much bigger than this, and for good reason. I probably am not going to use them. Just being honest, it's just not my style. If I was in a different area, I probably would, especially like a Latin America kind of place, jungle, places with vines and lots of branches and trees and thicket of that nature. But in Minnesota, I'm more likely to carry an axe and a big blade. And if I carry a big blade, this is the blade and probably the length that I would carry. I can do a lot with this, and even though the balance is very much so in the handle in a comfortable way, it still chops reasonably well. And that's what surprised me, is that this blade, even though it is kind of, I don't want to say handle heavy, but it's just balanced very appropriately is what I would say. It's balanced very appropriately. It still chops pretty well, and it's a V grind. It's not, you know, meant to be a chopper precisely. It's not like the intended purpose is just chopping, but it's Leicu inspired, and so it needs to be able to do some chopping decently well. And what I was doing right here was on this old poplar, just giving it some chops and testing out how well does it do. It was really cold. It was really cold this day. It was, I think it was sub-zero at the time I was actually using the blade here. And one thing that I did discover is a lanyard was pretty much necessary, and that's not a dig on the knife. That's not a bad thing, guys. I don't think that's negative at all. I just realized that I would do better with chopping if it had a lanyard for me to hold on to and kind of assist it on my wrist. The handle is a great design. I don't think it should change at all. There's nothing wrong with it. Genuinely, I like it. I'm just telling you that I think if I was going to chop with it more, which I probably am not, if I was going to chop with it more, doing logs or branches like this from time to time, for whatever reason, I would probably throw on a lanyard on there. And, you know, lanyards don't cost much. It's a piece of paracord. Easy enough to do, easy enough fix. If you've watched my channel for a while, or even my B channel, which is called North Knives, if you've watched either of those, you know that I like to carve. I'm a Swedish guy, and I like the kind of traditional Swedish carving and tools and the spoon designs in particular, and I nerd out on that kind of thing. And so I decided, instead of using a hatchet or a carving hatchet, I was going to grab this big blade and put it to the test on a really hard piece of cherry. And guys, this one was a little too hard to be carving. I left this for 2 years just as a blank, and cherry, for whatever reason, gets very, very hard. Very, very difficult to cut. Now, when I was chopping on it, it was doing a good job of taking those chunks out. It does have a V grind. It's not exactly a carving knife exclusively, and I don't think I would want it to be. You know, it's a survival knife. If it had more of a carving edge, if it was just a Scandi or something that was more conducive to taking big chunks of wood out. It would also be more brittle, and it would be thinner behind the edge. In a sense, I would be worried to use it as a chopper on such a hard piece of wood. The nice thing about this was this 3V held up really well against this extremely hard piece of cherry. I mean, it was almost like just breaking chunks and fractures out of it. It was like I was hitting a rock or something. It was so difficult to chop on this piece, but it did really well. And I actually just grabbed my strop as soon as I was done with this piece of cherry and kind of getting it down off camera to a workable piece and that carving there. And I grabbed my strop and I hit it, and man, did that thing strop back quickly. I was very happy to see that. I wasn't 100% sure how well it would do, but I think the convexed nature of the V grind there, just really easy to get it right back to shaving sharp. And when it did come shaving sharp, and I was able to get it back to shaving sharp. Can't say that for a lot of other blades. Usually I need to remove a little bit of material after working with it fairly hard. And this one, I just think there's enough meat behind the edge that I was able to put that keen edge right back on there. Looking at the way that it was ground, it looks very even on both sides of the blade, by the way. Looks like it was ground very well, evenly, back and forth, which matters a lot when you're stropping or resharpening. You want to make sure that you don't have weird angles to start with from the factory, but looked good to me. Here's a hard piece of oak, and oak, you know, it usually splits pretty well. I don't have too much issue splitting oak, to be honest. But it does a good job, and it's a decent size log. It's a hard log for sure, but not difficult. And that 3/16 inch thickness, if you are going to split wood a little bit with a blade, whatever your position is on that, if you are going to split wood with that a little bit, you have enough blade hanging out there with a 6-inch knife over, or 6-inch blade length overall. You can definitely get in there and get some leverage and some distance to span a bigger log just like that. Right there. Now this is a hard, twisty piece of elm. This is the one that actually kind of surprised me, as it blew through that piece of elm, and I was worried a little bit. I didn't want to use a smaller knife with it, and it had no problem. Again, bounced right back. 3V has a lot of great qualities as a steel, and this being a USA 3V blade, I've got a lot of pride in this knife, guys. That's a 3/16 inch thick slab of 3V. That's a lot of money that you're looking at right there. And yes, the blade does have a premium cost, but it also is a premium materials USA made blade. And so I'm pretty happy with this. It is a huge pride of ownership kind of thing. I know that some people might say, well, I could use my cheaper blade to do some similar things. Well, maybe you could, but the pride of ownership is not there on some of those cheaper blades. And this is for the kind of person, the customer, who recognizes high quality, good ergonomics, excellent materials, and they also have the pride of being an American-made product. They want to support American jobs right here in the States, and so that checks the boxes for me. That's why I can get behind it so well. Not to mention, it just works. If it didn't work, I would be like, hey, it's cool, but it's not for me, and it would move on down the line. But it does work. It does what it's supposed to do. And I think the Leica-inspired design, being full tang with the G10 handles that are ergonomic and they're big enough for me and my XL size hands, that's what I'm looking for. Not to mention, again, that it has a functional tip. The point is actually sharp enough to do some stuff with it. It's not just a big, thick pry bar of a knife. I can't tell you how to use the blade, but I can tell you what I'm thinking about this blade and what I'm willing to entrust it to. I'm going to use this as my vehicle emergency blade. I actually believe at this point, most likely, I want to have that blade with me in the case of an emergency. If I'm dispatching a deer on the side of the road and I really need a really robust, strong, trustworthy knife that has a good penetrating tip and still a sharp edge, this would fit the role. If I have vehicle emergencies where I need to pull over, I have to warm up, if I can't get my car to start and I'm way out backpacking somewhere far away, I need a survival knife in less than ideal conditions where I might need to do a little bit of chopping, kind of that Leica survival knife idea. You know, it fits the role for me. So I'm going to have this in my vehicle. I can just imagine so many scenarios where having a 3/16 inch thick, sharp CPM 3V blade with me would be ideal. I don't want to go out there with just the knife I had sitting around or my cheapest blade. You know, I like even Mora knives. I'll mention another brand. I like Mora knives, but I don't know if that's exactly what I want with me all the time. I can think of a lot of scenarios where that blade isn't going to cut it for me, and either the F4 or the F6 would, and certainly the F6 has a leg up when it comes to reach, length, strength, and ergonomics. It's just a very comfortable big blade that I like. It's not overly big, it's not too big, it's kind of the right size for a guy like me, so it's going in my vehicle. And I would love to hear from you guys down in the comments. What kind of knife or kit do you carry in your vehicle for emergency preparedness, especially now that winter is upon us? Do you carry a blade? Do you carry a blade like this? Do you agree or disagree? I'd love to hear that down below. But go check out Reiff Knives and his blades at his website. I think Amazon still has this one in stock right now.